This video will be a brief introduction into simplifying non-perfect squares. So when you're simplifying radicals, it's not completely simplified if a perfect square remains under the radical. So in order for it to be completely simplified, you can't have any perfect squares remaining under the radical. So an example like the square root of 40. You could think of this as the square root of 4 times the square root of 10. 4 is the perfect square. So the square root of 4 times the square root of 10. Since 4 is the perfect square, its square root is 2. So I would write the 2 without the radical symbol. And then the portion that remains a non-perfect square stays under the radical. So the square root of 40 could be simplified as 2 radical 10. Let's look at the next problem together. Radical 75, and you're always looking for the largest perfect square factor of the radicand. Well, 75 is 25 times 3. The perfect square is 25, so you could think of it as the square root of 25 times the square root of 3. The square root of 25 is 5, and then 3 is a non-perfect square, so it would remain under the radical. 1008, I'm going to have to play with that. 1008, let's see. Okay, so 1008 is 36 times 28. 36 is a perfect square, so I know I'm going to have the square root of 36, and then I can think of 28 as 4 times 7, looking for its perfect square factors. So I have the square root of 36 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 7. So that's going to be 6 times 2 times radical 7. So this is going to be 12 radical 7, which means that 144 times 7, 144 would be the largest perfect square factor of 1008. But if you don't see that right away, the way that I simplified this problem is an acceptable method for doing that. So the square root of 36 is the 6, and the square root of 4 is 2. I would take that product to get the 12, and then 7 would be the factor that is not a perfect square, so it would remain underneath the radical. And let's see, 1350, I'm going to have to play with that as well. So this is at least 10, which is not a perfect square, but it's 10 times 350, and 350 is 25 times 14. So 25 is the perfect square here. So I know I have the square root of 25, and then when I think about what's left over, that's 140. Well, 10 is 5 times 2, and 14 is 2 times 7. So when I find a number that's been multiplied times itself twice, that represents my perfect square. So right here I have a perfect square. So I have the square root of 25, which is 5. 2 times 2 is 4. The square root of 4 is 2. And then what would remain is 35. So my simplified answer would be 10 radical 35, which means that the easiest thing for me to do on the first step is to just simply multiply 100 by 35, leading me directly to 10 radical 35. But if you don't see the largest perfect square factor right away, you can still arrive at the answer if you keep on factoring, looking for perfect square factors.